All right, so the first part of this video is reviewing cellular respiration, and then we're going to move into something called fermentation. So we're going to review the questions on page 18 in your packet. So cellular respiration has a chemical equation you need to know, and it takes the reactants, so anything on the left side of the arrow is called the reactant. So glucose, which is C6H12O6, and oxygen, 6 oxygen molecules are needed for cellular respiration to work. When cellular respiration is complete, you have some products, that's what's to the right of the arrow, and the 2 of them are waste products, which means we don't need and our bodies get rid of them. So we need 6 water molecules and 6 carbon dioxides, and those 2 things get removed. So we either exhale out the CO2 or we urinate out the water. And then what's most important from cellular respiration is that 36 ATP was created. So 1 glucose molecule can be converted and changed into 36 ATP, which is energy needed for the cell. So the 3 phases of cellular respiration in order is glycolysis is first, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. So you need to know where each stage occurs. So the glycolysis actually takes place in the cytoplasm right next to the mitochondria. It actually isn't in the mitochondria yet. The Krebs cycle will take place in the matrix of the mitochondria, which is that fluidy part of the organelle in the space, and then the electron transport chain during cellular respiration takes place in the membrane. It's very, very similar to the electron transport chain in the photosynthesis light-dependent stage, having that ATP synthase molecule. So you need to know how many ATP is made in each step. So glycolysis makes 2, the Krebs cycle makes 2, but the most important stage that makes a ton of ATP is the electron transport chain, and that's a total of 32. Now the reason why it makes so much is because it has that ATP synthase, and it has those high energy electrons that it got from the Krebs cycle and glycolysis to pump all those hydrogens to get that ATP synthase to work, and then it makes all of that ATP. So which phase does cellular respiration make carbon dioxide? That would be the Krebs cycle, when it's taking pyruvic acid and breaking it down, and then a byproduct is carbon dioxide. In cellular respiration, it is requiring oxygen, and there's all these hydrogens from helping ATP synthase run, so those can get together and form water. And so water is made in the electron transport chain. In which phase is cellular respiration where oxygen is necessary? It's necessary in order for it to help that stages works, and that would be the second and third stage, Krebs cycle and electron transport chain. Glycolysis does not need oxygen. Which phase do we need glucose? That would be the very first stage, that is glycolysis. Glycolysis itself is a word that means sugar breaking, so it's going to take glucose and break it apart, and it's going to form something called pyruvic acid. What would happen to the cellular respiration process if the enzyme for one step of the process was missing or defective? So remember, enzyme helps speed up chemical reactions. So if it's not able to go through the chemical reaction, or slows down the chemical reaction because it's defective, then the process will not occur, or it will be very, very slow. All right, so looking at number 14, it wants you to compare photosynthesis and cellular respiration. And if you look, the equation for photosynthesis is almost the opposite to cellular respiration. The reactants of photosynthesis are the products of cellular respiration. There's that water and carbon dioxide, which were those waste products. And so that is something to remember when we review photosynthesis and cellular respiration. On the next page, there is a chart at the bottom of the picture that's just kind of a good way of helping you remember. So in glycolysis, remember that it means sugar breaking, so we need glucose for it to work. The Krebs cycle, it is a cycle, so it's breaking and reforming bonds, and it makes carbon dioxide. And then the electron transport chain needs electrons, it's in its name, to help it maintain and keep making all of that massive amount of ATP. The next chart is really, really important, and it's really nice to putting everything into one spot of what you need to know. What starts the reaction in the stage of cellular respiration, what's the end products, how much ATP, is it aerobic or anaerobic? And so this is a really, really good chart for studying, and I would star it. I would really star this chart. It is going to help you tremendously. All right, so first stage is glycolysis, and it happens in the cytoplasm. The starting reactants is glucose. The ending product is pyruvic acid and 2 ATP. How many? 2. And oxygen is not required, so it's an aerobic process. Krebs cycle happens in the matrix of a mitochondria. If there's oxygen present, it's going to move. The pyruvic acid is going to move into. So pyruvic acid is needed to start, and so is oxygen. Oxygen is very important to make this start. The ending products would be 3 things: carbon dioxide, high energy electrons, and ATP. How many? 2. And because it needs oxygen, it's called an aerobic process. Finally, in the electron transport chain, it happens in the membrane of the mitochondria, and you need high energy electrons and oxygen for it to work. And then the end product would be water as a waste product, and then ATP, 32 to be exact, to make a total of 36. And because it needs oxygen, it is also considered an aerobic process. All right, so this was just a quick review about cellular respiration. Now I want to go into your packet to fermentation notes, which starts on page 23. So I want to think about it's not 21, it's 23, so you can ignore that. It is another pathway, another opportunity for our body and for other organisms to make ATP if oxygen is not present or there is not much available. And so there is a process called fermentation that we're going to take notes on page 23. So fermentation is the process where our bodies can make energy from food, so still using glucose, but it's when oxygen is absent or lacking or not enough. So fermentation happens in the cytoplasm, and because there's no oxygen, it's going to be considered an anaerobic process. So this is a picture in your notes that I wanted to show what's going on. So we do start with glycolysis first, because again, glycolysis doesn't need oxygen, and it's going to make 2 quick ATP. So glucose will still be broken down into then pyruvic acid. Now, if oxygen is not present, instead of it going through the Krebs cycle, instead of pyruvic acid going into the mitochondria, if there's no oxygen present, it's going to stay in the cytoplasm, and instead it's going to go through fermentation. Now, in humans, we go through lactic acid fermentation. In other organisms, there is something called alcoholic fermentation. We are going to be focusing on the lactic acid fermentation because that's more relevant to us. So, humans carry out fermentation when there is a lack of oxygen present in our bodies. And so what happens is the pyruvic acid is converted into lactic acid. So when you are exercising pretty vigorously and you're huffing and puffing, you're going to kind of eventually run out of oxygen, and that's why you're breathing so heavily. And so you're not going to be able to maybe get enough. And when you exercise too much, sometimes your muscles get sore. And that muscle soreness is because you have a buildup of lactic acid in your muscles, and that needs to kind of release, and then your muscles won't be sore anymore. So this usually happens when you have short, quick bursts of energy. So for like 90 seconds, intense energy, you might go into lactic acid. The ATP, there is already ATP in your muscles, but you might need more ATP if you're doing something really quick and need an intense moment. And so you might have lactic acid fermentation get you some quick ATP energy because you don't have a lot of oxygen. If you are having a longer exercise, like instead of running a sprint, you are running a marathon, your body will need to go through cellular respiration. You cannot function on lactic acid fermentation for a very long time. So your body begins to generate ATP by going through cellular respiration. That's why a lot of people load up on carbs before a marathon, and that's why people can lose weight, because the fat storage they have turns into glucose, so for them to go through cellular respiration. All right, so please take a moment and review the notes and the reading down at the bottom to compare the difference between cellular respiration and fermentation.